We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. The first question is, early in this chapter, Paul is proving that gospel workers have the right to be paid by the people they serve. What verse does he use from the scriptures, which would be the law in his case, to prove his point? What case does he use from the scriptures? And this is in verse 9. He says, "For it is written in the law of Moses, do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain." And then he says, is it about oxen that God is concerned? Surely he says this for us, doesn't he? Yes, this was written for us, because when the plowman plows and the thresher threshes, they ought to do so in hope of sharing in the harvest. I'm going to turn to Deuteronomy chapter 25, which is where this verse is coming from that Paul is quoting. Because the next question is, how does this verse apply to his point? Deuteronomy 25 verse 4 says, "Do not muzzle an ox while it is treading out the grain." Now, looking at the context here is very instructive for how Paul interpreted the scriptures. We see here, let's start at verse 1. When men have a dispute, they are to take it to court, and the judges will decide the case, acquitting the innocent and condemning the guilty. If the guilty man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall make him lie down and have him flogged in the presence with the number of lashes his crime deserves. But he must not give him more than 40 lashes. If he is flogged more than that, your brother will be degraded in your eyes. Those are the three verses before this verse. And then let's read the verse right after verse 4. Verse 5, "If brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside of the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her and fulfill the duty of a brother-in-law to her." The verses before, the verses after, say nothing about gospel workers, say nothing even about priests or about workers in the temple. So how is it that Paul says that this verse, Deuteronomy 25 verse 4, applies to why gospel workers should be paid for their service? How does this apply at all? On the surface, there is no application. In the context of the original passage, there is no application. But the underlying principle of the verse is this: an ox who is treading out the grain is working to care for the grain and will eventually be doing work that will result in the grain being full grown and harvested. So this ox is serving the grain. But what would happen in these days, and still happens today in rural agrarian societies, is that the ox, in treading out the grain, would reach down and take a little bit of the grain, would nibble off some of the grain, would eat some of the grain that they're treading out. And what they would do to prevent this would be to muzzle the ox, would put a muzzle so that the ox is not able to open its mouth and eat the grain. Now, this is what the command is referring to, that you should not put that muzzle on the ox's mouth. You should not prevent him from eating, we could say, the fruit of his labor. He should be able to eat off of the work that he is doing. It's like me when I was in high school, I worked at Chick-fil-A, and they didn't muzzle my mouth. I could eat some of the food that I was preparing and that I was serving to others. They were following that command, I assume. But here in 1 Corinthians 9, Paul is applying this to gospel workers. And he uses that actually very directly in verse 11. He says, "If we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest?" And he's saying again that those who are working spiritually, that are laboring to help the grain mature, the seed of the gospel that have been planted in these individuals, to help them grow, to help them be built up in the Lord, they should be able to benefit also from the grain that's maturing. They should be able to benefit materially from their spiritual investment. And so again, the superficial rule, the law, has no application, but the underlying principle is the same. And so what does this teach us? That's the last question about how we can use the Bible. There are many commands in the Bible, many teachings of the Bible that have no relevance to our life today. We don't walk anymore by travel. We don't travel by donkey or by horse even. We don't live in an agrarian society. And not only do we not do a lot of the things that they did, there are a lot of things we do now that are not mentioned in the Bible. No cell phones, no computers, no internet in the Bible, no cars. There are many of the things that we live by that are our daily habits, their daily activities. They're foreign to the biblical context. However, the same principles that underlay the teachings of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, those same principles, taken out of their context, taken out of their actual application, can apply very directly to the Facebook generation and to the social media generation that we live in now. And this is what Paul did in his day. He took principles that did not apply directly, principles from laws that did not apply directly, but applied those principles to his practical life. And this is what we can do, and this is what God is even calling us to do in asking the Holy Spirit to lead us. How can I make decisions about what to post on Facebook? How can I make decisions about what to tweet? How can I make decisions about what kind of car I should drive? How should I make decisions about job difficulties? How should I make decisions about the things that concern my life? Again, the direct statements, the direct applications will not be in the Bible, but those principles, those precious principles that are eternal, they are there. And by the grace of God, we can unearth them and bring them and apply them into our life today.